Dear students, today we are going to learn about Constitution of India. In this session, we will see how the Constitution of India was formed from the British rule. We will start from Regulating Act of 1773 to Indian Independence Act of 1947. Within this particular set of period, it will be divided into two. These are Company Rule and the Crown Rule. Before this, we will start with a small introduction to Constitution of India. The Constitution is a set of fundamental principles according to which state organization is governed, which means it's a set of fundamental principles to govern the organization of a state. The idea to have a constitution was given by M.N. Roy. The objective of the constitution is to evolve a certain type of political culture that is based on values enshrined in the constitution and guided by the institutions established under the constitution, which means its objective is to develop a certain type of political culture which is entirely based on values enshrined in the constitution. Now look at the third point. Certain features of constitution can be understood better with a brief review of the constitutional setup in the preceding periods. We need to go back to understand the constitution better. As modern political institutions originated and developed in India mainly during the British rule, the origin and growth of the Indian Constitution has its roots in the British period of Indian history. So we need to go back to the British period to understand our constitution better. First, we can start with the Company Rule. The Company Rule. Its period started from 1773 to 1857. Within this period, East India Company governed our people through forming several acts. The first act was the Regulating Act of 1773. Main features of this act was to regulate and control the affairs of East India Company. It designated the Governor of Bengal as the Governor General of British Territory, which comprises Bengal, Bombay and Madras. A Supreme Court was established in Calcutta. These are the main features of the Regulating Act of 1773. Next we can go for Pitt's India Act of 1784. Main features of this act was it provided for Board of Control having 6 members, set up to guide and supervise the affairs of the company in India. It creates Board of Control having 6 members, and this act was set up to guide and supervise the affairs of the East India Company in India. The third one was Charter Act of 1793. Main feature of this act was salaries for the staff and members of the Board of Control to be paid from Indian revenue, which means the salaries for the Board of Control members and other staff members will be paid through the Indian revenue which can be collected by the East India Company. Next, there are 3 Charter Acts which was formed every 20 years. The Charter Act of 1813, its main features was ended East India Company monopoly of trade and provided 1 lakh grant for education in India. The company's monopoly in trade with China and trade in tea was remained enacted, which means it ended the monopoly of East India Company's trade, but the trade in China and trade in tea was remained enacted. And one more important feature was it granted 1 lakh rupees for education in India. Next one, Charter Act of 1833. Its main features was Governor General of Bengal to Governor General of India. It's very important point. The many questions will be asked from this act because in which year or through which act the power of Governor General of Bengal to Governor General of India was created. And look at the second point very carefully. It's also an important point. A law commission under Lord Macaulay was constituted. From this act, the company was no more a trading body but had become political and territorial one. This act was given the power to East India Company to become a political body. Next one, the Charter Act of 1853. The important features of this act was separate Governor of Bengal was to be appointed, recruitment of the company's employees through exams. Here, the competitive exam was come into role. Next point is, it extended company's rule and allowed it to retain the possession of Indian territory for British Crown. With this act, the company's rule was ended because in the revolt of 1857, there are a lot of mess happening in the British India. After that revolt, all the powers was transferred to British Crown. So, Now we are going to learn about the acts formed under the Crown Rule. The period of Crown Rule is almost 90 years from 1857 to 1947. The first act under the Crown Rule was Government of India Act 1858. Main features of this act was the power was transferred from the East India Company to British Crown. Second one, Court of Directors and Board of Controls was abolished. Third one, the post of Secretary of State was established. This is the new thing. With this act, they created new post which means Secretary of State. And one more thing, the Governor of General of India was made the Viceroy of India. And fifth point, it ended dual system of government. And the sixth one, unitary, rigid and centralized administrative structure was created by the British Crown. The next act under Crown Rule was the Indian Councils Act of 1861. Its main features was a fifth member from legal background was added to Viceroy's Executive Council, and Viceroy could now nominate some Indians as non-official members in his own council. With this feature, in 1862, 3 Indians were nominated to the council. This act made the beginning of representative institutions by associating Indians with the lawmaking process. The Executive Council was now to be called the Central Legislative Council. The next one was portfolio system, which was introduced by Lord Canning in 1859, was given recognition so that work could be distributed among the members. With this act, the Viceroy was given the powers to issue ordinances. The next act under Crown Rule was Indian Councils Act of 1892. The main features of this act was it brought an element of representation for the first time by allowing discussion of budget. The first budget discussion happened with this act. This act also introduced the element of election in India. Although the majority of the official members were retained, the non-official members were to be nominated by the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Provincial Legislative Council. Next important act under Crown Rule was Indian Councils Act of 1909, generally known as Morley-Minto reforms. Who are Morley and Minto? Lord Morley, the then Secretary of State of India, and Lord Minto, the then Viceroy of India, announced some reforms in the British Parliament. The member of the Legislative Council could ask supplementary questions, discuss bills, move resolutions on financial statements, and so on. The next point is the Legislative Councils both at the centre and in the provinces was expanded. Official majority in central and non-official majority in provincial council. By this act, the first time communal representation was introduced. Muslims were given separate electorate. The next important act was the Government of India Act 1919, generally known as Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Samuel Montagu, the Secretary of State for India, and Lord Chelmsford, Viceroy of India, prepared a report to introduce self-governing institutions in India. Next point, it relaxed the central control over the provinces by separating the central and provincial subject. This is the first time they are creating central subject and provincial subject. The Secretary of State powers were drastically reduced. The numbers of members of the Indian councils was reduced. Some executive councils members were to be Indians. The next point, direct elections were introduced for the first time in the country. The next one, the central legislative was to have the bicameral legislature for the first time. Next point, diarchy system was introduced in the provinces. This is the most important point. In Government of India Act of 1919, initially diarchy system was formed. The provincial subjects were to be divided into 2 categories, reserved and transferred. Transferred subjects were administered by the governor with the help of ministers responsible to the Legislative Council, and reserved subjects were administered by the governor with the help of his Executive Council. Look at this point very carefully. Transferred subjects were administered by the governor with the help of ministers, and reserved subjects were administered by the governor with the help of Executive Council. Next most important under British rule for our constitution was Government of India Act of 1935. In this act, the diocese system was abolished in the provinces, but it was introduced at the federal level. Initially, there are two subjects, but through this act, the division of subjects was made into three lists: federal, provincial, and concurrent list. It provided for the establishment of an All India Federation consisting of British provinces and princely states as unit, but the federation did not come into effect because the Indian princely state had not joined federation. It introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces, and the federal legislature had two chambers, Council of State and Federal Assembly. The Council of State was to be a permanent body with one-third of its members retiring every 2 years. The next point, the governor was given powers to use their discretion in certain matters. The Act provided for a federal court. It further extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for depressed classes, women, and labor. With this act, it provided for the establishment of Reserve Bank of India to control the currency and credit of the country. And this act provided for the establishment of Federal Public Service Commission and Joint Public Service Commission for 2 or more provinces. Next, we are going to see about Cabinet Mission Plan 1946. According to this plan, there was to be a Union of India consisting of both British India and the Indian states with control over foreign affairs, defense, and communication. This point clearly mentions there was to be a Union of India consisting of British India and Indian states. Provinces were given the powers to legislate all subjects except foreign affairs, defense, and communication. India was to be divided into 3 groups of provinces. By this plan, Union Constitution to be framed by a Constituent Assembly, the members of which were to be elected on a communal basis by the provincial legislative assemblies and the representatives of the states joining the Union. Next, Mountbatten Plan. Lord Mountbatten, the Viceroy of India, put forth the partition plan known as the Mountbatten Plan. It's a partition plan for dividing India and Pakistan. The plan was accepted by the Congress and the Muslim League. Immediate effect was given to the plan by enacting the Indian Independence Act 1947. Next, the Indian Independence Act 1947. Its main features was it ended the British rule in India and declared India as a sovereign and independent state from 15th August 1947. The office of the Secretary of State was abolished. The Crown no longer remained the source of authority. The Act provided 2 constituent assemblies for India and Pakistan. The Governor General and provincial governors acted as constitutional heads. The Central Legislature of India, comprising of the Legislative Assembly and the Council of States, ceased to exist on 14th August 1947. And the Constituent Assembly was to function also as the central legislature with complete sovereignty. With this act, the British rule was ended. Dear students, further constitutional developments will be uploaded one by one in the following videos. Thank you for watching.